Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, your one-stop shop for the 30 most important stories of the week, viewed from our unique perspective. It's a dose of reality. It can even be addictive. Hey, I'm Kevin Barrett here with special guest host, Kat McGuire. Hey, Kat, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, good to have you back on the show. Well, let's get our obligatory disclaimers and announcements out of the way here. Let's see. I think we start with a disclaimer, which is that if a dose of reality is too much for you, in fact, you might even OD on it or, have a terrible medical crisis if you hear what's really going on in the world, please change the channel and preserve your health. After all, stay healthy is the mantra these days. But if you find that bracing dose of reality to be like a cold shower or a bout of physical exercise and it's actually good for you, and it is for some people, then stick with us. So what else do we have? Oh, more PSAs. Check out the subscription list and get on it. Just email ffw@nolessradio.org and we can tell you when and where we broadcast in case we get deplatformed or suspended or whatever they might do to us. You'll still find our broadcast. And stand up for us. Please do donate to the cause. This is a crowd-funded program. We can't do it without you. And if you want to find out how, just go to wherever you're watching this, you'll find the link to our fundraiser. One more obligatory announcement here. The 9/11 Truth Film Festival will be virtual this year. The Grand Lake Theater in Oakland is closed. So if you want to see Christopher Goya and Eric Lawyer of the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, the new Pierce Robinson film, all sorts of other great stuff, you'll watch it right here, noliesradio.org. And this year's film festival is dedicated to the memory of Chuck Millar, as well as Julieta Chiesa and Sandra Brown, who passed away this year. And Chuck was actually a personal friend of mine, and he worked with us, Kat, on editing Laurent Guyonneau's book From Yahweh to Zion. And Chuck was one of the greatest guys I've had the chance to meet in the truth movement, which is saying something. There were a lot of good people, and he's one of the very best. I really miss him. All right, let's, and one more announcement. Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is raising money for Jeff Campbell, the Jeff Campbell reinvestigation effort over in the UK. His brother Matt and his mother Maureen need $100,000 to hire one of the best barristers, that is what they call attorneys over there, to pursue this in the High Court of England and Wales. Jeff Campbell was on the 106th floor of the North Tower and was blown to smithereens or whatever by the false flag criminals. And it's time to try and get some justice for the victims and the survivors. So we support that. You should too. All right, the news. So, Kat, who nuked Beirut? Esper walked back his disagreement with Trump. Trump said it was an attack of some sort, and Esper said it wasn't. And now Esper is walking it back and saying, well, we don't really know. Bottom line is we don't know. What do we know and what don't we, Kat?
Well, Trump is crazy. He throws out these teasers and it's the truth. And then it just goes away because he doesn't really act on them. That's like when Pompeo said COVID was a live exercise. And Trump said his aside, well, you should have told us. But that's as far as it went. So it's really frustrating. And now the attack angle is rarely discussed and everyone is saying it's an accident. That accident angle is really problematic because it opens up all kinds of negative possibilities, positive for them, I guess. But now they're having this color revolution. These protests are turning into a color revolution, and Prime Minister Diop was forced to step down. So it's very difficult, and I say Israel was involved. They've been involved in Gladio operations in Lebanon since 40 years ago when they were detonating bombs in Beirut and other Lebanese cities. And then, of course, the 1983 truck bombing of U.S. Marine barracks. So there you go.
And that's the thesis that we meet in Jeff Brown's piece. There were a couple of, we probably should have put Phil Giraldi's piece up here, the former CIA officer who just published a piece pointing the finger at the Israelis as the usual suspects. And here's Jeff Brown compiling a lot of stuff pointing in the same direction at his China Rising blog. Yeah, it does seem like sometimes the best way to cover up the truth is to put it in the mouth of Donald Trump. I mean, how better can you discredit it? But here, Jeff Brown has put together a pretty good compilation of many of the best reasons for thinking that this was an Israeli attack. He cites Veterans Today, where I'm a co-editor, points out that the craters, he compares the Beirut port explosion to the one at Tianjin port in China in 2015, which he is convinced was a U.S. attack because the Chinese supercomputer center was right next door, and the Chinese had just announced that they were going to surpass the U.S. We're going to get into that issue in a moment. In any case, Jeff says that the craters here at Tianjin port in 2015 and Beirut last week are similar. They're many tens of meters deep. There were massive plasma fireballs, trademark of a nuclear explosion, towering mushroom clouds, a red ochre color in Beirut anyway. You couldn't see the color at night in Beijing or in China. They both had primary and secondary explosions at both ports, and both were a casus belli and buried by the media to prevent a hot war. And would have been U.S. versus China in 2015, and it might have involved Israel and or the U.S. Versus Lebanon this year. And then both ultimately targeted China, according to Jeff. China has been trying to move into the Eastern Mediterranean. Its ambassador to Israel was murdered by U.S. agents in June as a message to the Israelis. The Israelis then walked back their plan to bring China into Haifa, which is their port. So the other port is Beirut. The Chinese were moving into Beirut when this happened. So Jeff sees this pretty much the way I do, which would be the U.S. gave the Israelis the nod to blow up the port of Beirut, which the Israelis have wanted to do ever since 1948. And all the circumstantial evidence points in that direction, as well as some of the hard evidence. The Asia Times is publishing on the planes, F-16 flyby just as the explosion happens, multiple witness videos of planes, multiple videos seemingly showing the missile. So I don't know, Kat, I think the evidence here is pretty strong, and Jeff says it's a done deal, 100%. This was Israel.
I believe it's Israel too. Some people were trying to say, well, the U.S. had a vested interest with China creeping on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean with their Belt and Road Initiative helping Beirut. But I believe it really was more Israel, because if the U.S. was really upset, or even if Israel is really upset, they would have bombed Piraeus, the port in Athens, Greece, which is now practically owned by China. And granted, it's not Lebanon, but it is on the Western Mediterranean. And so Athens was not bombed. Israel's vested interest is to do anything with an arch enemy. So China could go into Greece. That's not Israel's arch enemy. If we recall, a leading Japanese journalist in 2011 contended that Israeli intelligence sabotaged the reactor in retaliation for Japan's support of an independent Palestinian state. So basically, wherever you see enemies of Israel, they're going to make sure nothing happens, that they're going to make sure that those enemies get sabotaged in some way or other. And so I think, yeah, it was really Israel. And it might not have even been a nod from the U.S. We know that Israel hijacks operations, as Laurent Guinaud has said. They hijacked the JFK operations from the U.S., the West, 9/11, Stuxnet, General Soleimani, and the recent COVID hit on China. So Israel is all about rise and kill first.
Indeed, Israel definitely is the go-to suspect when you have these huge, kind of crazy attacks or really large-scale catastrophes. They're more willing to stick their necks out and take these kinds of big risks, which they've profited by, probably because of the extent to which they control or influence the big Western media. So yeah, I don't really know about who would have nodded. The U.S. and Israel definitely have slightly different interests, and occasionally American leaders may assert those interests, although they always do it in secret because they're afraid to do it in public. As far as who is really behind this and precisely what happened, we'll have to wait and see. And Hezbollah just yesterday, for the first time, spoke out and pointed the finger at Israel, saying that we need to wait till the investigation is done to be sure, but they're the logical suspects. And they would have waited, of course, to let the popular anger cool down a little bit, because they don't want to be forced into instant retaliation and then giving Israel a pretext to flatten Lebanon, according to its flattening doctrine, which is the new doctrine. The next war with Lebanon, Israel's going to flatten Lebanon, and they may have started with the port of Beirut. But I do think that there's a China angle here, Kat. The U.S. is probably dealing with that Greece port differently. There's no Israel that's willing to come in and blow up the port in Greece. The U.S. can't nod and wink at anybody to get that done, and it's probably not going to do it itself. So instead, the U.S. is supporting Turkey in its moves against Greece, even though Turkey is a big problem for the U.S. as well. So there are different ways of going after these countries. Italy got a huge COVID blast for bringing China into northern Italy. So the U.S., I think, is playing dirty games too against China. So let's move on and look at the China syndrome. And I'm not siding totally with China against the U.S. Some people think I'm doing that. I'm an American citizen, so my first responsibility is to critique my own government here in the U.S. But I recognize some serious problems over in China too. So let's try to look at this fairly objectively.
I would like to make a point, Kevin, and that the French have also gotten involved. Macron showed up and threatening that they want aid, they're going to have to play ball with the IMF. And the French minister was even
in Lebanon,
in July, right? In July, saying no widespread reforms, you're not getting any aid, and that the only alternative for Lebanon is the IMF. And so it's not just U.S. and Israel. We've got France as well playing their neo-colonialist games again.
Absolutely right. Yeah, France is often a troublemaker in these countries, as it was in Libya. France actually probably drove the destruction of Libya as much as the U.S. did. So, moving on to the China versus Russia rivalry for world leadership. China and Russia ditched the dollar. That's the headline here at asia.nikkei.com, pointing out that in 2015, 90% of China-Russia bilateral transactions were in U.S. dollars. Now they've fallen down to closer to 40% this year in the first quarter of 2020. So that is an attack on the prime financial instrument of U.S. dollar hegemony. And of course, the dollar is run by those international banksters who may not exactly be patriotic Americans. But this explains why the U.S.-China rivalry is heating up so much.
Well, it just doesn't. Right. So there is that. But one of the economists in the article, a Harvard economist, says that the dollar has 3 advantages over any rival, that they'll be able to maintain its value because of limited inflation and depreciation. The sheer size of the American domestic economy will make the dollar impermeable to this antagonism with China, and that the United States has financial markets that are deep, liquid, and open. So the article's kind of siding with the dollar will reign supreme, but what's not being factored in is the tremendous damage of these pandemic lockdowns that are totally going to undermine the dollar, and that Russia and China have been investing heavily in gold reserves. And then the whole Agenda 21 of a one world digital currency and social credit. Where does the dollar go with that when the globalists have all of us, East and West, in a digital currency that's all about what China's already implemented, the social credit?
So that Agenda 21 and this push for a kind of Orwellian society and based on its total surveillance economy where every transaction can be thoroughly tracked. Well, that's already happening in China, and it's well on the way elsewhere. And this Atlantic article from this week says the panopticon is already here in China. Well, wait a minute. It may not just be here in China. It may be a little bit further along in China, but I don't see too much evidence that the American leadership and the Western leadership is resisting this at all. On the contrary, they're racing with China to see who can create a dystopian Orwellian society first. But this Atlantic article spins it all as if it's all China that's doing that. Z wants China to achieve AI supremacy, that's artificial intelligence supremacy, by 2030. And we're going to see in a moment that the top Chinese AI people are saying that, yeah, we're going to have conscious AI by 2030. Which is pretty frightening no matter which country is doing it. But this article is saying it's this terrible thing is that China is doing it because China, it goes into great detail on China's historical suspiciousness of religion, its persecution of the Uyghurs, putting 1 million into camps and setting up a total surveillance society in East Turkestan. It gets into the city brains controlling Chinese cities, the social credit schemes, and then of course it worries that with the Chinese AI missile detection algorithms could void America's first strike nuclear advantage. Wow, that would be terrible. So this is a very one-sided article, Kat, but it's not, that doesn't mean it's entirely wrong. It's actually, I think, the Chinese are a step ahead in terms of dystopianism, but the problem isn't just in China.
Well, with everything that the press puts out, it's not what they say that's necessarily wrong, it's what they don't say. And so I believe that we are probably commensurate, certainly commensurate in technologically with China. Didn't Google declare a while back to have quantum computing supremacy? So I believe that we're not lagging behind China. What this basically is the West indirectly making a business case for bigger domestic technology budgets for itself. And this is similar to the Cold War era with Russia, that Russia has all these missiles. We have to keep arms race parity with the Russians. And so our governments would probably just proceed right ahead. Well, they are proceeding ahead as China, but they can't necessarily do it in the open because we have pesky democracy, to the great frustration of our Western overlords, who have to answer to the citizens on some levels. So I trot out the fear factor again. They're getting ahead of us in the AI race. It's not an arms race, it's an AI race. And so it's just more propaganda. We saw this before, fool me once, can't fool me twice.
Well, the New York Times, like the Atlantic, is putting out these anti-China propaganda articles, which again, I don't think are 100% wrong. I think there are some terrible things about the Chinese Orwellian dystopian plan. The collectivism in that culture plus technology does equal dystopia, and what they're doing in East Turkestan is genocidal and outrageous. But again, the West, who's the West to talk? Who's the US to talk? The US has killed at least 60 million people in the American Holocaust since World War II. And it's today racing with the Chinese to see who can create the first totally controlled society. So this nonsense about the wonderful Western liberal tradition that's ensconced here is obvious BS. And here's the New York Times telling us that, you know, we have a problem because we have neocons over in China. They're followers of Carl Schmitt. I don't think the New York Times has ever told us about the problem we have with the neocon followers of Carl Schmitt and his #1 student, Leo Strauss, who blew up the World Trade Center right there in New York. But when you have neocon followers of Carl Schmitt who want to bring in a permanent state of emergency to create an authoritarian government over in China, that's a problem. So why is the New York Times exposing the neocons in China, but they won't expose the neocons in the United States, Kat?
Exactly. China is both our enemy and our role model. So they have to kind of play it both ways. And what's interesting is as China becomes more neocon, which is like us, we're becoming more Marxist. The article said traditional Marxism is rarely cited in China. They are proponents of order, not revolution. Meanwhile, here in the US, where they won't call it the China model, but the BLM is the embodiment of cultural Marxism, which is Mao's Cultural Revolution. And they're trying to do an authoritarian overthrow here. Well, China already has that, but it's like they're emulating us and we're emulating them, which is sort of like this yin yang. The puppeteers at the highest level who are controlling both China and the West sort of allow each other to mirror itself. So Um, whether it's the totalitarian model of the Chinese or the more fascist model of corporate fascism, either way, the puppeteers are getting us to mirror each other so that they can have their global agenda take over.
I think there's some truth to that. Although I certainly don't think that the U.S. is going Marxist. I mean, I think that's the propaganda version you'll get on Fox News. But Marxism is about empowering the working class. Who's getting disempowered? It's the working class. The United States workers are getting screwed worse and worse every year, and especially now under the COVID emergency, the ordinary working folks who are actually having to show up in person at their jobs to work for something around minimum wage are still mostly unemployed. Their unemployment has now been cut off, and they're suffering horribly, whereas all the better off people are doing just fine with the luxury from working from home. And the biggest guys at the top are raking in trillions and trillions, making the biggest profits ever in history on the biggest swindle ever in history, the COVID crisis. So it is not Marxism at all. It's fake Marxism. You call it cultural Marxism if you want, which is cultural Marxism is you distract from the class issue. You let the workers go to hell and screw the workers, and then you whip up all this nonsense about identity politics. That's the kind of fake Marxism that we've got in the United States.
Well, yes, there's truth to what you're saying, but I also think they're manipulating Marxism, because what they're talking about now with this whole COVID thing is for the collective good. So even though that's not the economic angle of Marxism, they're using a lot of Marxist thinking to be able to manipulate people. And in terms of the economic situation, yes, that doesn't look like Marxism at all. What I believe that where they're going with this is really going to sock it to the working class, because if we want to bring jobs here from China, where's our manufacturing base? Our working class has been eviscerated now with high unemployment. A lot of people are going to lose their housing. And I think what could very well happen is that they're going to end up in FEMA camps. You want work? Well, we've got all this work now because we're moving jobs from China back here. And you can do the Chinese slave labor here in the US for 25 cents an hour. So no, that's not Marxist, but I think they're using a lot of mangled Marxist propaganda to get people buy into what is really a totalitarian fascist global coup d'etat.
So maybe where this is all going is that my old friend and False Flag Weekly News colleague Jim Fetzer may have been ahead of his time when he said years ago that they were going to lock us all up in Walmart. But now the plan is to lock the American workers up in the Walmarts and turn them into low-wage factories to make stuff to send over to China, which would be an ironic reversal of how it's been in the past. Well, these anti-China propaganda pieces in the mainstream, you know, we started with The Atlantic, we moved to the New York Times, and then now here's Niall Ferguson talking about TikTok in Bloomberg. And Niall Ferguson, who's the theoretician who told us the American empire was going to reign supreme thanks to 9/11, and then admitted later that it didn't work because Americans aren't just natural imperialists. Here he is telling us that TikTok is the opium of the people or the teenagers or something. He calls it a digital fentanyl to get our kids stoked for the coming Chinese imperium. So TikTok, which is just a bunch of, it makes it easier to do your cat videos, I guess. I've never used it. Is all about the coming Chinese empire. China is seeking to take over Empire 1.0, which is the global American empire, and turn it into America 2.0 based on China's illiberal civilization. So when the Chinese run this empire, it'll be Orwellian. But now when the Americans are spying on everybody, as Larry Romanoff points out in the next article, that's not Orwellian at all. Right, Kat?
Right, exactly. I think on some level, this TikTok takeover is really more a tit for tat exercise in business geostrategies, as well as being able to shore up each other's big brother agendas. China is concerned about censorship, and the US wants to continue to surveil. So they both have the same ends of controlling their citizens, but US wants the data right now, and China wants to be able to have a great firewall censorship of its people. But I think part of this is just kind of business as usual with political saber rattling thrown in to make it look it's still so important that we have to defend ourselves against the Chinese panopticon. Meanwhile, we have our own going on here.
Mm-hmm. But again, there's some truth in these propaganda articles. If we move back to the previous slide, the Niall Ferguson article in Bloomberg, Ferguson says that the Chinese believe, and he agrees, that, quote, the U.S. empire is unraveling because of three great unsolvable problems: the ever-increasing inequality created by the liberal economy, ineffective governance caused by political illiberalism, or rather political liberalism, and decadence and nihilism created by cultural liberalism. And he agrees with that, and so do I. So I think that Ferguson and the Chinese both have a point, that there is a crisis in political liberalism. And, you know, what's the solution to that? The Chinese basically have this ancient tradition of worship of the state and collectivism. And that's, I think, perhaps a solution that's worse than the problem. And so I actually agree to a certain point with some of these mainstream contributors up to that point. I think the answer, though, is to return to the Western tradition, which includes the Islamic tradition, which is a kind of pluralistic theocracy where God is given his rights too. And I'm sure you don't agree with that, Kat, but you're going to have to give us the short rebuttal because we have to move a little faster.
Well, I do believe that we are in a spiritual war. It's a war against humanity. And whether it has the flavor of Chinese totalitarianism or American fascism, it also ultimately will lead into the same thing. And we as people have to wake up, be either inside of ourselves or as collective protests against this, because it's them against us ultimately.
Well, and we do, you know, whether even people who don't believe in God, you know, like the Zionists don't believe in God, but they believe God gave them the Holy Land in perpetuity. And, you know, maybe even some Americans who don't fully believe in God or are not practicing would agree that we have God-given rights, such as the right to maybe someday in the future walk around outside our house without a mask on. Well, not in New Mexico. Governor Lujan Grisham says masks and social distancing both are now going to become permanent, forever. A boot stopping on a human masked face for all eternity. And Kat, you're in New Mexico. So I guess you're never going to be able to step outside without a mask on.
I'm outside right now. Don't tell him. I've been here for 2 weeks and I'm supposed to be doing 2-week quarantine, but we won't say where my whereabouts have been. But you've probably noticed that we will get to the election stuff, but now Biden Harrison are saying that everyone should wear a mask outside for the next 3 months. This diktat from on high to wear masks is it's crazy. It's almost like everybody saw the BLM protests and saw that, oh, social distancing didn't do anything. Nobody died. And all of a sudden they made us do a memory wipe, and now they're coming back full force with these masks, and there's not even, the deaths are going down. So what the numbers that they're scaring us with are cases. It's like people can't think cases is deaths. No, it's not deaths. But now because cases are high, we all have to wear masks. It's a very scary, totally Orwellian, full court press to get us into these muzzling devices to suppress or silence us.
And of course, they claim that the deaths are, you know, they're creeping up now, and they could spike because the deaths always lag the cases by 3 weeks. So we'll wait and see on that. But you know, however bad it may be in New Mexico, it's even worse in Melbourne, Australia, where there's a 6-week absolute curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. People are being attacked by goons in the streets if they violate, if their mask slips down off a nostril. Masks are compulsory everywhere outdoors across the entire state. And if the police catch you without a mask, in fact, if they even catch you outside your house and you don't have a good convincing reason, you'll be dragged off to jail. So I guess you better, you know, stick with New Mexico and New York, Kat. Stay away from Melbourne.
Well, Australia's cousins over in New Zealand are just as crazy. They're now demanding that anyone infected with COVID has to be relocated to a, quote, facility for a mandatory quarantine, which would include family members. Are these kind of COVID camps even constitutional?
Wow.
It's very scary. And if they're part of our Five Eyes, it's like, are they the cutting edge experiments of what's going to come here in other, as another English speaking country?
Wow. Well, over in the UK, they're talking about locking up obese people during the second wave. So I don't know if that would work in the United States. I guess they'll be setting up not only temperature sensors and mask enforcers, but also they'll have scales at the entrances to Walmart. And then people will have to humiliate themselves. And a lot of those people you see in Walmart are going to be really humiliated when they get on the scale and, the spring breaks out of the scale, it's broken, and then they're chased away and told that they can't enter Walmart because they're obese and a COVID danger. No, but seriously, this is getting really goofy, isn't it?
Yeah, but they don't know what they're in for. Wait till the fat shaming political police get down on them. All the political identity police have been out in full force, and I imagine the fat shaming ones will come out too.
And so when the obese people are forced to turn and flee from the fat police who are coming to shoot them with a tranquilizer dart to drag them off to their COVID camp, are they going to be able to outrun the cops? I don't know. But here's a doctor in the next slide who can run 22 miles in a face mask, so he doesn't have to worry about the COVID cops. He'll always get away. He won't even have to. I guess if he doesn't take off his mask, he won't have to run. Anyway, this doctor, Tom Lawton, used a pulse oximeter or oximeter, whatever, to measure his oxygen, and he did fine for 22 miles, proving that masks are totally harmless. And you can breathe through them just fine. And that's actually what Alan here at No Lies Radio found. He did it. He tested his oxygen with a mask on for like 5 minutes without doing any hard work. And he said he didn't have any problems. I don't know. I mean, I haven't delved into the scientific literature on masking and oxygen in the bloodstream. Have you, Kat?
Yes, I have. For starters, I think this is a pure propaganda piece. How many citizens can actually run 22 miles? So this is not the average person. You can have 1 million people live in a highly polluted city, but that doesn't mean all.
I can run 22 miles in a month.
I don't know. I don't think this applies to most people, but also there's no mention of hypoxia or hypercapnia, where you're not getting enough oxygen because you're masked, or you're rebreathing your own carbon monoxide. And that's what a lot of alternative
dioxide
who are not allowed to speak, like Dr. Blaylock was one, that this may not affect this person, but there are millions of other people who these things could affect and who are not at the ability to run 22 miles. And so I wish they'd at least mention hypoxia and hypercapnia in correlation to the average citizen.
Yeah, we need more tests. More research is necessary. That's what we always put in academic articles. And maybe Alan at No Lies Radio can continue his experiments. Instead of just doing 5 minutes of sitting in his chair with a mask on with no problem, he should put that oximeter on his finger and run 22 miles. Alan, if you run 22 miles and your oxygen holds up, I'll wear a mask into Walmart. That's a deal. All right. So how about the morality pills? That's the next solution for COVID is feeding people morality pills. This is from Professor Parker Crutchfield of Western Michigan University. He says people could take a substance to boost their cooperative pro-social behavior. He talks about psychoactive substances that act on your ability to reason about what the right thing to do is, or your ability to be empathetic, altruistic, or cooperative. And what are those substances? Well, oxytocin and psilocybin. Wow. So I guess if I have to choose between being held down and jabbed with a rushed vaccine versus being offered a handful of magic mushrooms, I'll take the mushrooms. How about you, Kat?
Well, I looked up a little bit about this guy, and he has all his degrees in philosophy, a doctor of philosophy. He's probably never really worked a true day in his life. And
he's been sitting around eating mushrooms and reading Kant and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and Plato.
Exactly. I think he deserves the Brave New World Award, and he should get a lifetime supply of Soma Happy Pills.
I think he already has one. So let's move away from that solution. I mean, we're coming up with so many interesting COVID solutions. How about the clear solution? The future is clear and it's dystopian. Health Pass is an extension of Clear's mobile app, and it links COVID-19 data like health questionnaire, temperature check, and follows people around. So this is a way that your cell phone or your whatever you guys who have these smartphones or whatever you call them. I don't even have one. I just have a landline, but there's this thing called a portable phone apparently that people carry around with them. I can't imagine why they would want a portable tracking device that also makes phone calls, but they do. And so people carry these things around, and now the apps are coming. So you'll be totally tracked and traced. Doesn't that make you feel warm and fuzzy, Kat?
Oh gosh, this article mentioned the Great Reset, which is basically a mashup of Agenda 21 and Agenda 30. This is not being publicized to the hoi polloi at all. Agenda 21 and Agenda 30 is all happy speak, words like sustainable, green, equitable, when really it's a total dystopic agenda. And what is talked about in this article is exactly where it's going. It's dystopia. But what is soon going to be, right now, the Great Reset is being directed at corporate world through the World Economic Forum, but it's being filtered down to the masses, and it's all this positive language about what a wonderful world the technology is going to bring us. And dystopia is the operative word that we need to make sure people know about.
And that's what C.J. Hopkins has been telling us for some time. Yeah, he has what's that book of his called? I have it over on my shelf there.
Zone 23.
Zone 23. Yeah, I keep thinking Agenda
Excellent.
21, Zone 23. Yeah,
it's a great book.
Yeah, he's a good writer. And in this essay, Invasion of the New Normals, he points out that the slogan, the new normal, has been relentlessly repeated in textbook totalitarian big lie fashion for going on the past 6 months. And that's a great point. I mean, the new normal is basically the media telling us it's the new normal. It's the new normal. It's the new normal. That has become the new normal. And no matter how insane everything is that they're telling us, hey, we have to accept it because it's the new normal. Kat, are you ready to accept the new normal?
No, I'm not. And we have to remember that these are the very people who could make the whole world believe Mother Teresa was a terrorist. And if they wanted to convince us that we should have pacifiers for COVID prevention, I could see everybody with pacifiers.
They'd rip off their masks and they'd shove that pacifier in their mouth.
Yeah. Yep. I think they're laughing at us. Can you believe we convinced them to wear those stupid, ineffective, hideous masks? We should force them into anything now. What do we want to make them do next? I think they're actually, I think they were very nonplussed by how easily they succeeded in trouncing us and getting us to self-house arrest, wear these stupid masks, and distance ourselves from our fellow humans.
Could be. I mean, there may, just like there's that great image, I don't know if it was David Deese, I think, that did it of Cheney and Rumsfeld and Bush cackling and laughing and, high-fiving and as the World Trade Center blows up in the background, saying jet fuel, that's a good one. And maybe they're doing the same thing with this. I don't know. Although I'm not quite as 100% convinced as you are, Kat, that, this notion of the virus, the pandemic, ways of stopping it, and so on and so forth. I'm not 100% convinced that all of the mainstream stuff is 100% wrong. However, I agree completely with the obvious creeping dystopianism and propaganda that's accompanying it. And part of that is the censorship. With Facebook, we just saw 7 million posts taken down for supposedly spreading coronavirus misinformation. And my friend, Dr. S, I'm not sure if he wants me to use his name on this broadcast, so I'll leave him out of it. But he's an MD from Texas who's been posting stuff on how to be healthy to his friends on nextdoor.com in his Texas city, where he's become very, very popular. And everybody loves him, or they did, until he posted something about how Fauci is lying to you. And suddenly he got a bunch of outrage and they froze his account for 4 days. So it's really the open discussion of these things is being sabotaged. And I argued with Gordon Duff about this. Gordon totally supports the mainstream alarmist view of COVID and the mainstream medical wisdom. And so Gordon even though he's normally blowing the whistle on a million red pill topics, actually seems to support this COVID censorship. So I had a big argument with him last week on my radio show, and then brought on, had a rebuttal to him last night. But anyway, I agree with the people who are saying the censorship is unacceptable. I mean, how can we get to the truth if we can't have a free discussion of it?
Well, it's like the old days in the Soviet Union where it got so broken down that nobody believed a thing that was said. And to me, that is sort of the media equivalent of the movie Brazil, where everything was technology, but it was all broken and falling apart. Well, that's what's happened with the media. There's no integrity, truth, or true knowledge or communication going on, and people realize that.
And Facebook, despite its reputation in the mainstream as being supposedly the more libertarian outlet, as they are regarding pro-Trump propaganda, but in other ways, they're the most totalitarian and suppressing not only COVID so-called misinformation, but anti-Zionist stuff, including from Jewish people like Richard Silverstein. In the next slide, we feature Richard Silverstein's piece on the suspected Israeli attack on Beirut. And Richard found some high-level Israeli sources that confirmed that Israel attacked the port of Beirut. That's what happened in this explosion. And their story was that they didn't mean it to be such a big explosion. So maybe that's a cover story. I don't know. But Facebook censored him and forced it to be taken down. But then just very recently, he updated the piece and says that now they have put it back up and apologized to him. And Richard points out that all sorts of reliable sources are reporting the same thing. Asia Times published a report based on Lebanese intelligence sources naming Israel like culprit Beirut. The Syrian intelligence through Thierry Meyssan says the same thing. So Facebook actually did the right thing here in putting back, but the fact that they took it down in the first place is still concerning.
Well, I think what all of these YouTube and Facebook, what they're going to be facing is a form of AI sickness. When the AIs take over and make these decisions, and it's no longer humans actually doing it, who knows what all manner of distortions are going to surface. So expect AI discombobulation.
Yeah, that's they're already doing that to some extent, and then they're also farming out decisions to totally unqualified people, and they're censoring really good stuff. Not just Richard Silverstein, but the Nation of Islam, which is really a very, very good group with a solid brain trust. And I've met some of those people personally. They are very sharp people. And here's another censored article you can't post on Facebook from the Nation of Islam on the history of white supremacist Jews and the Ku Klux Klan. We're only allowed to tell half the story about Jewish communities throughout history, the positive half. The other half, the negative half, which all human groups have done negative things, but we can't talk about the things that Jews have done, including this. They open it with the story of Manny Steiner, the Ku Klux Klan honoree. Huge Ku Klux Klan parade. Was it to lynch this Jewish guy? No, it's to honor him. And all over the South, it was the same thing. This notion that the Klan was anti-Jewish and that the Jews were totally 100% behind ending racial prejudice against blacks and stuff. That's at most one part of the truth. But there's this huge other part that never gets talked about, except from the Nation of Islam. And then, their book, The History of Blacks and Jews. It's censored, suppressed. Nobody's allowed to talk about any of this on social media.
Right, including the fact that the KKK was founded by B'nai B'rith, and in the mid-1800s, many elite Jews were actually insurrectionists against the U.S. government, constantly trying to topple the U.S. government like Soros is doing now. And the recent brouhahas over blackface, Megyn Kelly faced it, and the Virginia governor, actually, in all of those blackface discussions, it was never brought up that blackface was dominated almost exclusively by Jewish entertainers. Mm-hmm. So there's so many hidden secrets that the slave auctions were shut down on Jewish holy days. So when is that side coming out?
Well, it's already come out for people who were paying attention to the Nation of Islam and their excellent research group. Well, we're going to have to move a little faster here. We have over 10 stories left in 10 minutes or so. So let's start with the ADL. Speaking of which, the ADL founded to defend a murderer who blamed blacks for his rape and murder, Leo Frank. According to Ron Unz's excellent analysis anyway, the ADL poses as a civil rights group, but 100 plus leading anti-racist social justice groups say it's time to dump the ADL, which is a disguised pro-racist group. And I agree with them.
I do too.
Okay. How about the election news? Trump is defunding the post office to try to stop mail-in ballots, even though he's doing a mail-in ballot himself. That's the big mainstream headline. He says Trump says the election will be rigged if there are mail-in ballots. Your thoughts, Kat?
Well, the post office sort of set themselves up. They were already in big trouble. And it just doesn't make sense for a bureaucracy like the post office to suddenly take on this huge election endeavor. The post office it's a bureaucracy, and it's just not the proper vehicle for redefining the voting process in a mere 3 months.
That's possible. I don't know. We'll have to put off the in-depth discussion on that and move on to the huge political news. Joe Biden has sniffed out a nice black female candidate, Kamala Harris. Rhymes with Obama. Don't ever pronounce it Kamala or you'll be a racist. She's a totally Zionist candidate, just like Biden. She's so pro-Zionist that even J Street, the liberal Jewish, pretty much pro-liberal Zionist organization, will not back her. So she's even worse than Biden, or even better if you're a Zionist. And the next slide points out the same thing, that, that basically these Israeli and Jewish publications are just dancing and cheering and singing Hava Nagila over this choice. So she gave 2 speeches at 2 AIPAC conventions. My goodness, Kat, are you planning to vote for this ticket?
No, and anyone who was for Trump better look out, because in June of this year, she actually said, quote unquote, once Trump's gone and we have regained our rightful place in the White House, look out if you supported him and endorsed his actions, because we'll be coming for you next. You will feel the vengeance of a nation. No stone will be left unturned as we seek you out in every corner of this great nation, for it is you who have betrayed us. That was Kamala Harris.
Wow. So all of the, 50 million plus Trump voters are going to end up working in Walmart, making stuff for the Chinese in the Walmart detention camps, it sounds like. Well, seriously though, Kat, I do think that you can make an argument that the real authoritarian problem in the United States today is not so much the Trump authoritarian problem, although there is a bit of one, but actually it's the backlash to Trump authoritarian problem. And if somebody's going to become a vicious American dictator who locks us all up in Walmart, it may not be Trump. It might be somebody like Kamala Harris, because this backlash to Trump, which is being whipped up into frenzied hysteria by the mainstream, could turn into something really ugly with somebody like her, a former hardline, vicious prosecutor, love to lock up pot smokers in jail. She'll love to lock up Trump supporters too, and lock up anybody who criticizes her, including people like us who are not Trump supporters. So I think we have to worry about fake left-wing authoritarianism, perhaps even more than right-wing authoritarianism. And most of my sort of left-leaning friends totally don't get that.
I completely get it. I completely agree with you. Basically, the left with Antifa and the Bolshevik roots of the left are showing their true colors now. One of the first things the Bolsheviks did when they came to power during the Russian Revolution was get rid of the police and install their own, which was Cheka, which became the KGB, and that even led to the gulags. So I absolutely agree, and I am a leftist since I was teething, and I have totally flipped. I'm not right wing, but I'm not left wing either. I like us to move towards something called transpartisan, where we take the best of both and leave the rot of both behind.
Makes sense to me. That's just kind of thinking for yourself, but not going party line. Uh, the one place where I'm kind of party line, and I know you are too, Kat, is in opposition to Zionism. I don't see a whole lot of good in Zionism. Uh, Although I guess there's a sort of messianic impulse in Zionism that could be turned towards idealism. In fact, even Jeremy Roth-Kushel sometimes, plays with that idea, but in the real world, not so much. Anyway, the Zionists are always up to something nefarious, and this week it was hooking up officially with the United Arab Emirates, one of the most hideously disgusting, materialistic, child slaving, human trafficking, corrupt drug smuggling regimes in the world. And now we have two of the most corrupt, evil regimes in the world on the same page, claiming it's some kind of wonderful peace plan. It's obviously an election stunt designed to keep Trump and Netanyahu out of prison.
Right, their true colors are coming forth. How ironic. We're all forced to wear masks. Meanwhile, they're finally taking their masks off and showing their true colors.
Indeed. The Emirati leadership is now officially unmasked, and I can't wait for the backlash throughout the Arab world. Hopefully, this will lead to the people overthrowing these tin pot dictators and these Gulf state potentates and taking back their countries. Well, how about this revelation that Israel was planning an ethnic cleansing? We know they've been ethnically cleansing Palestine now for, since at least 1948, through massacres and expulsions and other horrors. But they were actually going to send 60,000 Palestinians to Paraguay, where they were friends with the Nazi dictator of Paraguay, who supposedly was hiding, Hitler and other high-level Nazis. So, Zionism and Nazism were two sides of the same coin. And they actually sent thousands of Palestinians to Paraguay after they stole the Holy Land, or more of the Holy Land in Jerusalem in 1967. And nobody knows about this. They used this mass expulsion of thousands of Palestinians and forced them into exile in Paraguay, and the whole world never heard about it. I mean, talk about proof that the Zionists utterly and completely control the media. My goodness.
And they do the inverse as well. In trying to build the state of Israel, they use many false flags in Iraq, in Morocco, to round up Jews to sort of induce them to immigrate into Palestine. So it worked both ways. Get them out, bring them in. It was all deceit.
And they've been terrorizing people forever, as Thomas Suarez's wonderful book, State of Terror, shows. Zionists have been mass murdering not just the Arabs, but everybody else, including their fellow Jews, often in false flags, to whip up the terror that allows them to sustain their insane project of stealing land thousands of miles away and committing genocide on the people who live there so they can build some kind of insane messianic state. But the insanity over there, it comes in many forms. And one of them is in the prime minister's office, a criminal named Netanyahu. And his office is surrounded by protesters. Thousands, 5,000 one night, 15,000 the other night, are surrounding Netanyahu's office and demanding that he leave and be sent to prison. He's been charged with bribery, fraud, breach of public trust. He should be charged with genocide and war crimes. Can't wait to see that guy imprisoned. And at least there are some people in Israel who get that much.
Right. I wish we could see more of those kind of anti-government protests here in the U.S. as well, especially anti-lockdown protests. I'd like to throw in that August 22nd in New York, there is going to be an Revive New York, bring back New York's normalcy. At noon, City Hall, August 22nd in New York. So we need to get out too. Bravo to the Israelis for doing this, but I wish they'd get as worked up about their country's ethnocide of the Palestinians as they do Bibi's bribery and fraud.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a whole nother type of Israeli that loves to go up onto the hilltops and watch them mowing the lawn and cheer and barbecue as the Palestinians are burned alive by white phosphorus, as ambulances are blown to bits, hospitals are blown to bits, United Nations installations blown to bits. And unfortunately, those types of Israelis seem to be in the majority. And the government in Israel, it's not just Bibi Netanyahu's the problem. The whole government is the problem. Ghislaine Maxwell, or Ghislaine, I guess she called herself, or Ghislaine, or whatever the heck her name is, who's now languishing in prison in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, is supposedly complaining that there are strange guards wandering around. people who are not real guards who are keeping an eye on her there. So she's afraid of being Epstein. At least that's the spin here in the National Post, which is a hardline Zionist rag up in Canada. And the National Post tells us, as an aside, that Epstein's death has been the source of a raft of online conspiracy theories. You think?
I think she's going to get off because they didn't really charge her with much. And both sides of the aisle, both the Democrats and the Republicans, are up to their necks in all kinds of nefarious activity that she could blame them on. So they both want to set her free. I suspect she'll be exfiltrated, have some plastic surgery, and be on whatever island Jeffrey's now on with a lot of young girls.
Well, unfortunately, I can't really argue with that. It's unfortunately all too plausible. How about something more positive? MT. We have some very uplifting stories about MMT, starting with the cities around the world that are now creating their own currency. They don't want to be reliant on Rothschild petrodollars anymore than the Chinese or the Russians do. So Tenino, Washington State is putting out in circulation wood dollars that they used to use back in the Depression, using the wood from their local economy. Great concept. And then the next slide after that, let's check out the Bible of MMT, this new 2020 published book by Stephanie Kelton, which is saying essentially that if we use money creation in the public interest, we can use it to fund infrastructure and useful projects and actually have a much better functioning economy. I don't think she points the finger at the banksters quite as sharply as people like Ellen Brown do. I haven't read the book yet. And then finally, we'll finish that section with the review of her book by a seemingly hostile economist who's actually half converted to her cause. And so this author, Stephanie Kelton, was the chief economist on the Senate Budget Committee and the senior economic advisor to Bernie Sanders. So this whole idea has some traction. And I think this is moderate good news. How about you, Kat?
I'm no economist or know that much about monetary theory, but any theory that does not delve into detail about usury or interest, the central banks and fiat currency, can hardly be of any use for today's pressing financial issues. I'd like to bring to light a man named Anthony Migchels, Migchels, who's a Dutch economist, and he has some interesting work if you look him up. And he claims that 40% of everything we make goes to paying off third-party parasites, the middlemen, the transaction fees, all of this unnecessary overhead, he claims is 40% of the body politic's actual earnings. And he also says that in medieval times, there were like 200 days a year for holidays. People didn't work nearly as much as we do now, and they made enough to enjoy life. So this is the real issue, not all of these speculations that the deficit myth is putting forth. I think if we get at usury and interest and third-party fees, I think we'd be doing well.
That's a good point, Kat. If we let the Rothschild usury bankster cartel just print as much money as they want and inject it into the economy, that means even more debt, public debt, to that cartel. So that's no solution at all. MMT only makes sense if you're using public banking to do it. Well, let's finish up with the warning to Joe Biden. This is our favorite conspiracy theory of the week. When the too friendly bear who's been sniffing women's hair was caught and castrated, this is actually a cryptic message to Joe Biden to keep his social distance from Kamala Harris's hair and everybody else's hair as well. I'm sure, Kat, you don't want Joe Biden getting anywhere near your hair, and I wouldn't blame you.
Oh my gosh. I haven't seen him smelling too many African-American women's hair. So I guess maybe that was a reason to bring Kamala Harris in as well, new hair smelling possibilities.
And I hope she's using a Biden repellent spray on her hair. They have bear spray. Well, she probably has Biden spray on her hair just to make sure. All right, we've hit the end of today's show. Thank you so much, Kat McGuire. I love getting together with you, and I do hope to see you in real life again someday when all this madness is over. And thank you to our viewers and our loyal supporters. Back next week, same time, same channel. Till then, have a great week.
Bye, thanks.